When we think of slavery in the Americas, the image is almost always the same. White male slave owners with total power over black bodies, black women forced into hidden bedrooms, black men chained in the field. But hidden inside that story is another truth, one many history books barely whisper: the role some white women played in the exploitation of black men. In the 1700s and 1800s, plantations across the American South were vast human farms, producing cotton, sugar, rice, and unimaginable cruelty. A single wealthy family might own dozens, sometimes hundreds, of enslaved men and women. These plantations weren't just fields, they were entire worlds ruled by a white family. And while the white men controlled trade and politics, the white women, the wives, daughters, mistresses of the house, ruled the daily life inside. When the master was away, handling business, fighting wars, traveling north, the mistress was the supreme ruler. She decided who worked where, who ate what, who got punished, and who entered her private quarters at night. Enslaved black men were seen not only as free labor but as symbols of raw physical power, strong, young, and feared. White society portrayed black men as dangerous brutes, yet some white women turned that fear into something else behind closed doors. Historians have found letters, diaries, and court testimonies hinting at this dark truth. Some white women coerced enslaved black men into sexual act. Sometimes it was subtle, a promise of lighter work or extra food. Other times it was brutal, threats of whipping, selling them away from their families, or outright accusations of rape if they refused. These men were trapped in a deadly paradox. If they submitted, they lost control of their own bodies. If they resisted, they could be beaten, sold, or lynched on false charges. The same white woman who forced herself on an enslaved man could later claim he attacked her, and no jury would doubt her word. On some plantations, these abuses were an open secret. Other enslaved people knew what was happening but could do nothing. Speaking out meant risking the entire family's survival. A black man forced to serve the mistress at night still had to face her husband in the fields by day, carrying secrets that could get him killed if the wrong word slipped. In the rare moments when a white husband discovered such affairs, the blame never fell on his wife. The black man would be called a beast, an animal who seduced a pure white lady. Newspapers might publish his confession under torture or no trial at all, and the punishment was swift: flogging, mutilation, or public hanging. These stories didn't just stay in the dark. They left scars across generations. Some families passed down whispered stories of grandfathers who were forced to father children for the mistress's pleasure, or to produce more enslaved laborers. Because for slave owners, every baby born to an enslaved woman, no matter who the father was, meant more profit. In some cases, white women abused their power to punish men who defied them. A young black man who looked a mistress in the eye or dared to reject her could be labeled dangerous. His life could be ruined overnight, sold downriver to harsher plantations, ripped from his wife and children, or accused of a crime he never committed. A few brave abolitionists wrote about these horrors, but in the North, even the most sympathetic newspapers preferred stories about enslaved women suffering under white male masters. It was easier to fit that into the narrative of good Christian wives and mothers. Exposing white women's abuse of black men would mean admitting that power, when given absolute, corrupts no matter who holds it. Plantation records, wills, and old trial papers still carry traces of this hidden history. A note about an unruly buck sold to a distant state. A mistress's letter complaining of a lazy boy who would not come when called. Slave narratives collected in the 1930s tell stories of men who whispered the truth only when they were old, their abusers long buried. Yet the damage lived on. Children born from these secret assaults were reminders that slavery was not just about chains and cotton, it was about total domination of mind, body, and future. Black men had no right to say yes or no. This part of history rarely appears in textbooks. It makes people uncomfortable because it shatters the myth that white women were always innocent bystanders to the horrors of slavery. Some were victims of their own husband's power, yes, but some turned that same power on those they owned. And so, behind the plantation mansions and sweeping fields, another story played out in candlelit bedrooms and locked chambers. A story of secrets, fear, and forced silence. A story that many descendants are only now beginning to tell out loud. The Civil War brought hope of freedom, but for many black men in the American South, the chains did not vanish overnight. Even as Union soldiers marched through plantations and freed men and women fled to contraband camps, the old power structures clung on like ghosts that refused to die. In the chaos of war, some enslaved men thought they could finally escape their mistress's reach. Some joined the Union Army, swapping the plantation fields for a blue uniform and a musket. But even then, stories spread through the ranks of soldiers ordered back to plantations by Union officers, traded for favors, or handed over when plantation mistresses claimed them as runaways. For those who stayed behind, who didn't or couldn't flee, the threat of forced intimacy lingered. A mistress whose husband had gone off to fight for the Confederacy might still see the young black men on her land as hers to command, in the fields, in the house, and sometimes in her bed. And with no law to protect these men, the terror of accusation hung over every moment. When slavery was abolished in 1865, black men stepped onto paper as free citizens, but their freedom was fragile. Many returned to the same plantations as sharecroppers or tenant farmers. Some rented small plots, hoping to carve out an honest living. Yet the old relationships of dominance didn't disappear. White women who once owned enslaved men still wielded power through new forms, hiring black men for wages they could withhold, threatening to ruin a man's reputation with a single rumor. A whisper of, "He came into my house uninvited," was enough to destroy him. In the Jim Crow South, that single lie could lead to a mob, a noose, and a tree. This is the truth behind some of the most brutal lynchings in America's history. Many so-called crimes black men were killed for were rumors of improper looks or disrespect toward white women. Newspapers would print wild tales of black men attacking the purity of Southern womanhood, but buried deep beneath these headlines was often the twisted power dynamic that had begun under slavery. One famous example is the case of Emmett Till, though decades later, 1955, a 14-year-old boy from Chicago visiting Mississippi. He was accused of whistling at a white woman, Carolyn Bryant. Decades after his brutal lynching, Bryant confessed that parts of her story were lies. Yet the lie was all it took to unleash terror. It was the same old tool. The image of the black male as a threat to white womanhood, weaponized to maintain white supremacy. These false accusations were not new. They were a haunting echo of the old plantation days when a white woman's word, true or not, could decide whether a black man lived or died. But despite the fear, black men resisted in ways large and small. Some fled north, seeking anonymity in cities where no mistress could find them. Others spoke out, risking their lives to tell the hidden truth, in whispered stories passed down to sons and grandsons, in letters smuggled north, in books that few dared publish. In the early 1900s, black intellectuals like Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois began to rip away the mask, exposing how myths about black men and white women fueled violence and reinforced the old plantation hierarchy. Ida B. Wells in particular investigated lynchings and showed that many of the so-called assaults were fabrications, excuses to terrorize black communities and keep them under white control. Yet for all their courage, much of this history remained hidden, pushed to the margins, buried under polite Southern nostalgia and romantic plantation myth. Generations grew up taught that white women were only victims during slavery, ignoring the uncomfortable reality that some used their protected status to exploit black men who could never say no. Today, descendants of those black men still search for pieces of this past. DNA tests reveal secrets families kept quiet for centuries. Old diaries, dusty court papers, and hushed stories told at funerals still whisper about the men who bore the burden of silence, who carried this hidden violence in their bloodlines. To understand the full story of American slavery, we must look beyond the fields and the lash. We must look behind the closed doors of plantation houses, at the rooms where power played out not just with whips and chains but with forced intimacy, threats, and betrayal. This is not a story about blaming all white women or absolving white men. It is about seeing the truth in its entirety. When a system gives one group total power over another, it corrupts, twists, and poisons everything it touches. As the 20th century moved forward, the legacy of this hidden history shaped the everyday lives of black men across America, from the cotton fields of the Deep South to the crowded tenements of northern cities. Jim Crow laws made the false fear of black men a weapon that white communities, including white women, could wield at will. A black man looking the wrong way, speaking out of turn, or simply standing too close could be accused of impropriety, and in too many cases, that was all it took for mob justice to come crashing down. Some white women, trapped in harsh marriages or seeking protection from their own society's double standards, sometimes turned this power into a shield and a sword. A whispered rumor could ruin a man's life while shielding their own status. The cruelty was that the lie didn't need to be proven, it only needed to be spoken. Black families learned to teach their sons the rules of survival. Don't linger. Don't talk back. Cross the street. Look down. The unwritten code was passed from father to son, mother to child, generation to generation, not out of weakness, but as armor against a world eager to twist an innocent glance into an unforgivable crime. And yet, through this, black men found ways to live, to love, to build families and communities despite the weight of history pressing on their shoulders. Churches, music, and underground networks became safe havens for voices long silenced. In these spaces, people could speak the truths that could not be spoken in public. Writers and activists began to pull this hidden truth into the light. Zora Neale Hurston, Richard Wright, James Baldwin, each in their own way peeled back the layers of polite lies that covered the violence, the silenced stories, the forced intimacies. They wrote about the forbidden, the unspeakable. They forced America to see what had always been there, just behind closed doors. In modern times, DNA technology has cracked open secrets once thought buried forever. Families discover white ancestors hidden in black lineages, and when the story is traced back, the pattern is painfully familiar. An enslaved man, powerless to resist. A mistress with the law on her side. Generations who carry the legacy in their blood but rarely speak it aloud. Even now, this part of the story makes people uncomfortable. Textbooks rarely mention it. Movies about slavery focus on the brutal overseer's whip, the cotton fields, the auction blocks, but they shy away from what happened behind plantation walls, in bedrooms, in the secret threats whispered under candlelight. Yet if we ignore it, we lose the full truth of how power worked, and how it still echoes today. This hidden history shaped laws, racial stereotypes, and the dangerous myth that black men are always the aggressors and white women always the innocent victims. This lie justified countless lynchings, wrongful imprisonments, and unspoken silences that still echo in courtrooms and neighborhoods today. But telling the truth, even the parts that shame, disturb, and challenge us, is the only way to heal the old wounds that never truly closed. So when we ask, what did white women do to black slave men? The real answer is not simple blame or easy anger. The real answer is that within a system that gave unchecked power to some and stripped humanity from others, people made choices. Some resisted, some conspired, some used the system for comfort, survival, or cruelty. And many black men suffered in silence, their stories erased or hidden behind polite myth. Today, their descendants speak. They reclaim family stories. They demand that this history be taught in schools, that monuments and textbooks tell it fully, not as half-truths but as the whole, complicated, uncomfortable reality. Because only by facing what was hidden behind those plantation doors can we understand how deep the roots of racism run, and how hard generations have fought to break free from its grip. This is not folklore, it's fact. To understand the cost of freedom, we must know every hidden truth. Subscribe to Dark Africa Files, where we uncover the shadows that history tried to bury. ****